Hello and welcome to my presentation of Next Generation Internet for Southern Utah, a 5G wireless deployment plan. First, to get started, just really quickly, a little bit of information about myself. My name is Cody Anderson. I am the Director of Network Operations here at InfoWest. I've been with the company almost a year, and previous to that I was with AWI Networks for about 17 years up until InfoWest acquired AWI at the end of last year. All right, just to get started as a quick overview, we're going to be covering topics, what is 5G and why do we need it? We'll be looking at the impact of COVID-19 has had on internet traffic. I'll be looking at future technologies and why that needs things like fiber optic and 5G. Be looking at fiber optics themselves and how that relates to 5G. We'll be looking at kind of the health concerns that are out there with 5G and other radio frequencies. And then we'll be kind of looking at some fixed wireless solutions, which is kind of the direction that we would be looking at with InfoWest rather than mobile technologies. And then just kind of look at the closing recommendations. All right, so what is 5G? 5G stands for fifth generation cell phone technology. It's basically the newest specification for the 3GPP standard, which is the standard used for cell phone companies out there. They're responsible for creating 1G for first generation, 2G, 3G. Most of us are currently been using 4G. 5G is just the latest version of that. Basically, in that specification, they've made accommodations to get ever higher bandwidth, lower latencies. It's not really frequency specific. It's more just how to put the technology together. Generally, you're using actually multiple bands at the same time to try and just get that higher throughput. A couple different bands being used. I mean, there's low band spectrum that's pretty hard to achieve. I know there's been a few auctions recently. T-Mobile's acquired a lot of the old TV channel space at 600 megahertz. Not as much capacity, but it can penetrate walls and into buildings really well. So that's been a big driver of mobile 5G. In the mid-band spectrum, like around 2.5 gigahertz, there's a lot more spectrum and it can kind of penetrate through walls. Sprint has had a lot of that, and they've just it's actually a big driver of why T-Mobile just merged with them. And then there's a high band spectrum, which is kind of what we're looking at up at 28 gigahertz. It doesn't really go through walls very well and probably has limited use for mobility, but has a lot of potential for fixed antenna installations, which is what we already do here at InfoWest. We put an antenna on the home. So this would be really similar technology, but by using a higher frequency, you have a lot more spectrum to use to offer much higher speed plans. So the question is, why do we need 5G? Well, looking at some of the current trends have been released from Sandvine. Sandvine is a company that offers solutions for managing bandwidth for a lot of large providers, and they release a yearly report analyzing internet trends. They released a special one this year that looks at the impact of COVID-19. And in this, the current internet traffic, they're showing the video gaming and social media currently account for over 80% of all internet traffic, with everything else like web pages and email. And that's just only 20% of what's being used. And so that's a big driver of where things are going, especially with video content. So how you have to look, how did COVID-19 actually impact us? Again, from this report from Sandvine, they've looked at downstream traffic had a 23% increase just from February 1st to almost the end of April of this year. With everyone staying at home, working from home, obviously they're looking at a lot more videos online. Additionally, looking at upstream, that increased by 121%. A lot of that was a lot more Zoom online meetings, a lot more upload traffic to try and feed that video back out to the internet. And so this is kind of just a look at where trends are going. People are looking for ever more and more bandwidth, and we've kind of had a spike this year. There's a lot of future technologies coming down the pipe that do a lot with interactive content, like with virtual reality and augmented reality. These kind of put you in immersive worlds. It's kind of real time, so it requires really low latency, much lower than what you would currently get through a cell phone, even standard traditional cable modems or anything. The latency has to be faster. Fiber optic can achieve this, and 5G is also. That's why that's such an important part of the specification. These new technologies could require up to 200 megabits per second just to provide the video content, as opposed to 10 to 20 for current video content. And this isn't just for gaming. This is actually being used in a lot of industries, like the Medicare. Doctors being able to visit patients, or even looking forward to being able to perform procedures remotely. Or just if you're having meetings, or even with online learning, rather than trying to watch everything through a teleconference, you can actually be there in the classroom with everyone else remotely. So a lot of these are becoming more and more commonplace, but require a much faster connection to be able to do what they do. So one of the things that everyone looks at is, well, let's just put fiber optic to everybody. And that's pretty easy with new communities. If the roads are already torn up, you just put new conduit down, easy deployment. But with existing communities, you're looking at having to dig everything up, trench it. Maybe if you're lucky, there might be power poles around that you can utilize. But a lot of the newer communities don't have that. And even some of the older ones, everything's underground. So if it's aerial, you're looking at some estimates show it at $26,000 per mile to install. If you start having to dig, you're looking at $173,000 per mile. So the costs are pretty prohibitive. A lot of times doesn't happen without government grants or lengthy loans. So with 5G, you're really looking at just bringing fiber to one location in a neighborhood, whether that's to a local tower or even like maybe a taller building. And then from there, your access point would deploy the signal out to each home. But you still would be able to provide the fiber optic experience without the same cost. You would need to have fiber optic at that transmission point just to be able to bring the amount of bandwidth for the access point to transmit out, but that's a much lower cost than bringing it to every single home. So with 5G, there has been a lot of health concerns, different information and misinformation in the media. Probably not going to go too far into that in this report. That would probably be a whole nother report to look at all that. But just kind of briefly looking at it, 5G, it's using frequencies that are already in use by existing technology. There's nothing new frequency-wise there. There are some higher frequencies that are being utilized, but those have been being utilized already by existing radios, just more special use cases. The transmission power of these radios, it's the same limitations that the FCC sets on existing equipment. It's not operating at a higher power. Really, you're just kind of aggregating multiple radios at the same time is really what 5G is doing that's different. And a couple new techniques, really. Again, looking at those higher frequencies, while those are becoming more utilized than they have been in the past, those actually penetrate through walls less than lower frequencies and have, again, just as low a power level as lower frequencies. So that's why they're not as useful for mobile, but you put up a fixed antenna on your roof with line of sight, there's a lot of potential for those. And a lot of this misinformation that's coming out, I mean, there's been some crazy ones saying that 5G is causing coronavirus, but a lot of this stuff is actually coming from foreign governments. They're trying to sabotage, the deployment of new infrastructure because the economy is based on having good bandwidth to both businesses and homes, and kind of helps other countries kind of get a leg up and trying to get their infrastructure up and running sooner than ours. So I mean, there is some risks with radio waves that have always been there, and that's with the heating. And generally, that's to do with your proximity and the power level. I mean, if you're looking at a microwave oven, for example, that's a pretty high power, 1,000 watts in a small box. And even like FM radio towers are transmitting, several thousand watts at a pretty low frequency, and that's why they put them up on mountaintops usually. But most cell phones, it's actually usually under a watt, or even your Wi-Fi, and you're usually a good mile, or at least a couple blocks away from any of the towers. So the power level that you're being exposed to is dramatically less, to where measuring any amount of heating would be pretty hard to do. Also, the American Cancer Society has stated that there's no strong evidence that exposure to RF waves from cell phones causes any noticeable health effects. Obviously, there's ongoing studies, but with all the knowledge that's been gained so far, there has been no proven negative effects from that. So just to look really quickly at the fixed wireless solution that we've kind of been analyzing using the 28 gigahertz band. Again, you get much higher bandwidth because it's line of sight, higher frequency. We're looking at up to 400 megabits per second per customer, which as opposed to 50 to 100 with current equipment. Our typical package would probably be around 200 megabits per second per customer. The equipment costs would be around $350 is the expected cost that Cambium Networks has given us. And the equipment is compatible with future 5G standards equipment. So as more vendors start producing this, we could drive those costs down. So again, the access point we'd be looking at, it's using the 28 gigahertz band. It's a licensed band that InfoWest has access to. So we're not looking at interference like we do in the current 5 gigahertz bands. And this is capable of up to 3.2 gigabits per second per access point. So again, really being able to bring that bandwidth from the fiber over wireless to each customer. Typical deployments about 3 to 6 miles. Generally want to try and keep that under 3. And we're looking at about $7,500 per access point. So you have that covering a neighborhood or an area within 3 miles. So just to summarize, some of the recommendations that we have to move forward with looking at 5G would be to work with Cambium Networks to secure some of the test equipment for their upcoming 5G radio. This is a kind of a new piece of equipment that's currently in development, so we'd have to work with them to secure a beta trial of that. Additionally, we would need to secure long-term access to the 28 gigahertz spectrum that we have, since it is very dependent upon that. And of course, need to find the locations where this makes the most sense. Is it really hard to get fiber optic, but we have a lot of demand. And then we need to develop our marketing strategies to be able to offer these new packages to customers. Figure out how many radios we're looking at purchasing, a timeline of equipment to deliver it. And based on all this, we could obtain better pricing based on the expected purchase volume. Additionally, this using Cambium equipment uses a vendor that we're already familiar with, so this would be a pretty win-win situation for us to look at. All right, well, thank you. That concludes this presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know.